Hey everyone, my name is Keith Horwood and welcome to part 3 of the Introduction to Nodal, where we're creating a Node.js Twitter clone known as InstaTweet. Rather, we're creating the API server for that Twitter clone. So the very first thing I'm going to do, I'm already in the InstaTweet API directory. I'm just going to run our server and we're going to just go over two endpoints that we previously had. So the first endpoint is tweets. Send a request. Awesome, we have 11 tweets. That's working fine. Send a request to users. Cool, we have 3 users caked in here already. That's amazing. That's what we've been doing so far. So what we're going to cover in this video is actually creating access tokens for user authentication and login, essentially sessions that a user can use. So we'll go back to our Nodal generator and we'll do Nodal G model, and instead of having a model name like we would for a typical any old model, we'll give it the special flag access token to generate an access token with some pre-built functionality in it. So cool, we get the access token model created and we get a migration created for that access token. So let's look at the access token model. What's in here? Well, we're pulling in from user because we're going to actually have to make sure that the user is a valid user. Once an access token is created, we want to generate access token strings for the actual access token that gets sent to the user to validate their session effectively. And we have a login method for creating access tokens, a verify method for verifying an access token exists and the user it belongs to, and we have a logout method for destroying the access token. Okay, so how do we actually interface with these access tokens? Well, first of all, let's make sure we migrate this so our access tokens table is actually created. Cool. Now we want to create a controller. So nodal g controller, namespace it to v1, and we say for access token. Cool, and now we've created our controller. So let's look at our access token controller. It has this basic CRUD interface that we don't actually need right now. Let's do this one at a time, so see how we'd create this interface from the ground up. Let's create the create method first for access tokens. So what we're going to do is call accesstoken.login. We're going to give it this.params, because remember, if you look in here, it takes params and it takes a callback. And the callback is of the form, gives 2 variables back. It's the error and the access token if it exists. Okay, and then we just want to do a simple API response. So this.respond error, or if the error is null, access token. Cool. So that's up and running. Let's make sure our server's running. And let's do a get request to access tokens first to see what happens here. So we get a 501 not implemented response because we didn't even write a method here. Okay, great. That's exactly as expected. Let's go to a post to access tokens. Cool, so the first thing it tells us is must apply grant type. So let's look at why it's doing that. If we go to AccessToken.js again and we look at login, the very first line is checking to see if the data from the post body data actually has a grant type in its password. This is due to the OAuth2 spec saying if we're authenticating with a username and password, we have to tell it what grant type it expects. Okay, so let's give it a grant type. Let's go to body here, and let's say grant type is password. Tells us user not found. So the very next thing that this is doing is querying the user table for the username that you provide. So let's give it a username that we know exists, Keith WHR. Great, now it says invalid credentials because we haven't provided a password, so we give it a password. Password is password. And cool, the access token is actually created. Now, how do we use this access token to actually validate that the user is real and use this information for something useful? Let's go back to our tweets endpoint. Okay, so we want to do a post to our tweets endpoint. And if we recall, we have no user validation here. So we can give a tweet body of hello, no user. Do a post request, and the user ID is null. Now that's no good. We don't want not logged in users to be able to post tweets. So let's go back to our tweets endpoint and see what we can do about this. Well, we don't have any wrapper around anything getting this user ID for this create. So now what we're going to do is actually look at this auth controller that was created when the project was created. So if you look at tweets controller right now, it's inheriting from, oh, I actually have it extending auth controller, cool. So normally, tweets controller would be extending from nodal.controller. So what we're actually going to do here is have tweets controller extend from auth controller. We have to make sure that we do the import for not auth controller here. And then we have access to, because we're inheriting from auth controller, we have access to this authorize method. Okay, so authorize right now is basically saying callback null. We're just continuing with the process good as ever. So in create, we will do this dot authorize. The error is not being passed back as anything. So we can wrap this dot authorize again. Sorry, we can give it this dot authorize to wrap whatever our logic is. And we can send to this endpoint again. And we are going to create a tweet with no user again. So that's no good. We actually want the user associated here. So let's add some parameters here. User and access token. And let's go back to our auth controller and let's actually get our access token into our auth controller. So access token is nodal.require app models access token.js. So now in this authorize, we will do access token dot verify. We'll provide the parameters, and we will give it the callback. And we'll eliminate this callback null here, and go back to our tweets controller rather. And so now the verify method of access token will be passing back. Sorry, I believe it's access token and then user. So if we have an error, we can just do this dot respond error and return it to halt execution. Otherwise, we want to create the tweet. Okay, now let's run that and see if that works. There'll be one more issue that we need to fix up, but is our server running? Okay, good. Okay, cool. Now it says our access token is invalid because we've wrapped it in that verify, and we're outputting the error. So, excuse me. So we noticed that we created this access token earlier, and I've kept this up in the background just for this reason. Now, if we provide the access token in the query parameter here, this should let us post this data. And it did. But it says hello new user, and the user ID is still null. So how can we rectify that? Well, we see that we have the user as a parameter here. So we can just say this.params.body.data.user_id equals user.get ID. And now we can say hello has user. And we're doing a post with this access token in the query parameter. And now we see user ID is 1. So that's basically how we can do basic user authentication around the tweet endpoint. So now in order to create a tweet, if I don't provide this access token, and I try and send this data, it will just tell me my access token is invalid. And if I do have the access token, it'll let me post. Awesome, and it'll give me the correct user for that. So the last thing we want to cover is, one, are there shortcuts here? So you can do this if you'd like, and it's completely up to you as the developer, what implementation you'd like. We can actually abstract this error logic here. And in our auth controller, instead of just passing the callback right away, we can do error access token user. And we can do all the error handling here if we'd like to. So we can say if error return this.respond error. Otherwise, do a callback of error access token user. Cool. So now this way, this access token actually will always respond with an error, and we don't actually have to write that logic ourselves. So I remove that logic from here. We can actually remove the error altogether if we'd like to do it this way. It's just as an example. And just call back the access token and the user. So let's see if that works. Yep, it does. And I remove the access token again. And it just says my access token is invalid. Awesome. Exactly what we expected to happen. Cool. So now how do we actually destroy these access tokens? So instead I want to do a delete on access token. And I'm just going to provide an access token ID here. So this is the easiest way to set up access tokens instead of providing it as a like slash ID. I've decided just to implement it like this. So if you go to back to your access tokens controller, let's add a destroy endpoint, and we can do access token.logout this.params air access token, and just do a this.respond air or access token. Okay, so let's do a delete to access token again. And it's going to tell us our access token is invalid, so we need to validate with the access token. And cool, we get an access token back, but it's a successful response. Oh, it even has the user joined in there. So we'll want to give a filter to that just to make sure we don't send back a password or anything like that. But it successfully deleted the access token. Let's look at what was actually run here. Delete from access tokens. Okay. And now when we try and do this create tweet again, even though we're using the same access token we were using before, we send a post to this, and it says your access token is invalid because it no longer exists in the database. Awesome. So that's how you use access tokens in Nodal. It's a very simple implementation that the developer is free to modify in any way they want. It uses idiomatic Nodal models and controllers, so you can go in and write all your own code and play around with it. And I hope you enjoy. I hope that was very straightforward. What I'd like to do in coming videos is introduce you how to actually launch a single page application using Nodal, create an actual like asset compilation pipeline. And I'll get to that in the coming days, but that was the introduction to Nodal as an API service, and I hope you enjoy. There's lots of active development. I'm very thankful for the positive response I've been getting. So keep in touch, star and follow the repository on GitHub, follow me on Twitter, and yeah, keep up with the project, and contributors are always welcome. So thanks, and